Hi there, this is the Common Magician. We're going to try a little bit of an experiment here. I've got a deck of cards, and they should be mixed up, relatively mixed up. Just to be certain, we'll give them another shuffle here. Now, if I had you here with me right now, what I would do is I would have you make a selection, a number, from 1 to 52, any choice that you wanted. You can see that they are indeed shuffled. And you could tell me what that number was, and then we would perform a little bit of an experiment. Now, since you're not here, I'm going to use these dice to represent some randomization. And there's a few different ways we could read this, although here it's pretty straightforward. Well, we have an option. We can either go to 6 or we can go to 33. Really doesn't matter, but let's go to 6. Okay, we're going to go to 6 on this one. I'm going to say that at the 6th position from this deck is the Queen of Clubs. 6th position, Queen of Clubs. Now, if you were here, I would have you deal this face up right there. If you were here, you'd be able to do that. So we'll do it very quickly. 6th position, Queen of Clubs. Let's see if I'm right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Queen of Clubs. 6th position, Queen of Clubs. So we would be right every time. It wouldn't matter what you picked. We would be able to discern what the card is. So I have gone through the process of learning a deck stack. I'd worked on learning the mnemonica stack. I even made a mnemonica training tutorial video out there that I'm sure some of you get a kick out of. And I spent some time on that. I started to acquire an understanding of that stack. I even put together a major post peg system on that. So that I could remember it a little bit more efficiently than just the brute force memory. And what I discovered with that stack was that unless I was using it all the time and living in it, I wasn't going to really remember it well enough to use. And the truth is that given the premise of this channel and who I am and the kind of magic that I do and the frequency that I do it, I wasn't going to be living in it. I wasn't going to be spending a lot of time on it, which meant that I wasn't going to be doing really any stack deck kinds of work, presentations. So that's unfortunate, but I'm okay with that. I can give that up. I got thinking about that a little bit more, wondering, was there a way that I could use a stack that was more intuitive than the mnemonica stack, and less reliant on some other undesirable elements that you can find in various deck stacks. And I thought, well, I wonder if I can make my own. If I made my own stack that operated on principles that were easy for me to understand and recall, if I could get something that looked good enough and worked well enough that I could use without having to live in it, without having to really keep that skill going. Memory is a perishable skill. If you don't really live in the material you're trying to remember, you will forget it over time. I'm a musician. That's my real job. I'm a music teacher, and I have a whole language there of music that I live in. And I remember that stuff. I recall that stuff. And there's certain elements, particular in the jazz idiom, where if I'm not doing that very frequently and working in that very often, I'll start to forget certain elements, and I'll have to go back and look at theory books and try to recall how some of those constructs worked. So memory is a perishable skill. If you don't live in it, you forget it. And that's really the way most people work. There is that claim with some deck stacks like mnemonica. I know that Tamraz makes in his book that once you learn this, you'll never forget it. Well, I don't think really people work that way. I think that some people work that way, but that's not how most of us are. Likewise, there are some other undesirable parts of other deck stacks that I don't like, particularly ones that require the use of mathematical equations. I'm terrible at math. I've always been terrible at math, very simple math. I have to think a little bit harder than most people, especially if I'm under pressure. I don't really compute all that well, quite frankly. It's just not the way my brain is wired. So a dependency on even simple math equations is a no-go for me in performance kinds of environments. I won't recall and I won't compute quickly enough and efficiently enough really to use those kinds of systems. Likewise, there are some sequential types of stacks that work in a sequence, and maybe because of some of this math deficiency that I've got, sequences that don't really fit intuitive sets, like sets of 5 or 10, are not easy for me to grasp. So some deck stacks like the Stebbins stack, which is mathematical and cyclical, is not good for me. I don't remember the equations well enough to use one card's position to understand or to recall another one, in relationship to it, the way it's supposed to work. Or a stack like the 8 Kings stack, which some of you may know is a sequential stack of 13 cards. There are 13 cards per suit, but it's a sequence of 13 cards that repeats 4 times so that you have all 52 cards. And it follows the same sequence, and it follows also the order of suits in chaste order. So that's clubs, hearts, spades, and diamonds. So you have 13 over 4 sequential elements, and trying to keep that put together in my mind is a little bit tricky. I don't have an easy time, if I set that into an order and I name a number, for example, I have a very difficult time trying to figure what's at that spot in that stack, because it's not in an order that's intuitive. It's 13 and not some other kind of typical subdivision like 10 or 5. So this got me to thinking, maybe I can make my own stack. And this is what I came up with. So I'm not going to let you stare at this very long, because there is some order to it. It's not perfect in that respect. If you look at it for a good amount of time, you'll start to see some patterns emerging. But in general, this looks shuffled. This is shuffled. You can see a mix of suits going on in there. Even when you think you find some kind of order to it, suddenly there's some kind of a monkey wrench thrown in there that messes it up for you. And what it has is it meets all of my requirements, and I'm going to go through this in a minute and explain what my requirements were in coming up with this. But I wanted something that looked shuffled, something that you could count through face up. And it did not appear to have any kind of logic to it. Things didn't seem to be in a particular order. Yet at the same time, it was, 80% intuitive. Things that were in a specific order could be very easily remembered as being in that order without having to do any brute force memory, a whole lot of brute force memory. So here were my limitations. This is what I wanted. I wanted very little brute force memory. I didn't want to have to make songs to remember this. I didn't want to have to make flashcards to remember it. I wanted to understand the concept, and within minutes, I want to know how it works and be able to recall it and put it to some kind of use. Now, that doesn't mean I wouldn't need to practice, but I want to be able to put it to use almost instantly just by understanding a basic premise of some kind. That means that it has to have a system. So very little brute force memory involved. It needs to be systematic. The system has to have an intuitive meaning, so that the system that's in play needs to have an intuitive kind of construct to it that doesn't require me to learn a bunch of other things. Just, the way I conceive of systems and orders and patterns already, as an adult, that needs to be easily applied to whatever the system is. So intuitive meaning. So very little brute force memory, must have a system. It's got to have intuitive meaning. It cannot rely on traditional math equations. I didn't want to be adding and subtracting numbers to figure something out. So it cannot have any traditional math. It can use patterns. It's okay if it has a pattern, some kind of sequential repetition pattern, but no math equations. And it needs to be using groupings of 10. So the way I conceived of this is 5 groupings of 10 gets you to 50, and there's 52 cards. So you're looking at 5 groups of 10 with 2 cards left out and accounted for just by memory what those cards were. But somehow getting 5 groups out of a set of cards that has 4 suits and 13 cards per suit. Is there a way in which I can create 5 repeating sequential groupings plus 2 cards, so that I can look and think about numbers as number 1 and 11 and 21 and 31 and 41 being the same thing. Okay, and number 2, and number 12, and number 22, number 32, number 42 being the same thing, and so on. I needed to be able to think of it in that way, in a repeated sort of pattern. I did not want it to be in suit order. I did not want it to be in chaste order, so that when you see it spread out, even if there seems to be kind of a disorder to it in terms of numbering, you would not be able to see very clear red, black in some kind of suit order. So the suit order needed to be ambiguous enough, if there is any, that it would not be easily recognized. So again, this is my list. I wanted to have very little brute force memory. I wanted it to have a system. I wanted the system to have an intuitive meaning so that I wouldn't have to memorize much. I could just know it. I wanted it to not rely on math. It can use patterns, but no mathematical equations. I wanted it to have groupings of 10, and I wanted it to defy suit order. So that's 6 things I wanted. Okay, 6 things that I wanted. Again, I came up with this. You can see it there. Again, you'll find some repetition in there. You'll find some sequences going on in there now, knowing what you know. But otherwise, this looks like a shuffled deck upon, fair viewing. And certainly, if it's cut, if it was cut and not in exact order, it should look even better. Okay, so that's what I wanted to have. So those were the my pie in the sky prerequisites. I want to have my cake and eat it too. Let me show you how I got there, or the closest I was able to get there. And in the process, I'll teach you maybe a process by which you can either create your own stack or put this one to use without having to spend a great deal of time memorizing information. Okay, so as I walk you through this, what I will do is I will essentially reinvent what I came up with, so you can sort of see the logic that goes into it. Now, there are some things you'll have to remember. There are some rules that are applied here. The idea, though, is that hopefully the handful of rules that you need to remember are easy to remember, and they'll be, I think, recalled pretty quickly by you because they're just really simple, kind of systematic patterns to them. So I've got notes here with a number of rules written down, and I'll go through them procedurally in the order in which I came up with them. To start, we're going to take a deck that is in order. This is not a new deck order, but it is in an order. And what I have here is I have suits separated, ace through king. So the first thing is that I wanted to have it in some kind of suit order, but I did not want to have it in an intelligible suit order. I wanted to be people to look at it and not recognize some kind of suit order, card for card, every 4 cards is a different suit cyclically around. So what I decided was I would put them in the basic suit order, how I like to think of suits. This is just the way my brain works. I usually think of spades first, because that has probably the most prominence among suits is the spades. You have the ace of spades, royal flush in spades, just the one I think of first. I tend to think of the hearts second because a spade and a heart are really the same shape. They're just inverted. And the spade has a little bit of an extra piece on it. It makes it look kind of like a shovel, like a spade. So hearts and spades are closely related. And then I think of clubs and diamonds, and these are about as opposite as you can get. A club and a diamond look nothing alike. Clubs have a lot of 3 round, sort of edges, sections to them. And then the diamond is a very sharp looking, 4-sided symbol. So I think of suit order like this: spades, hearts, clubs, diamonds, black, red, black, red. Okay, so I'm going to work in this way. Now, the first thing I did was I allowed myself to use a suit order that I could then monkey around with and change so that it wouldn't be so apparent, because it is easy to remember things by suit order. So the first thing I did here is I broke down my deck into 4 sections of 10. Now, there would be 5 sections of 10 plus 2 cards in a 52-card deck. So 50 divided down into 5 parts, 10 cards in each one, would leave you then with 2 extra cards left over. Now, there is a very intuitive design to the cards in that they use numbers, and the number cards are 1 through 10, ace through 10. So by that measure, I already had 4 groupings, ace through 10, ace through 10, ace through 10, ace through 10. And then that would leave out the face cards in each one of the suits. So the first thing I did is I took my face cards and I set them aside. And I started with just the number cards. I'm going to deal with the face cards later on. This gets me 4 sections to work with. 4 sections to work with, and then I would have a 5th section plus 2 cards to deal with. So I'm going to go just to these 4 sections first. And again, they're in this order: spades, hearts, clubs, diamonds. The second thing that I did is I divided the deck in half such that the reds and blacks on one side would mostly be made up of spades and hearts, and then the second half would be made up of clubs and diamonds. And I can think of the deck in that way, that my top half of the deck is spades and hearts, the bottom half of the deck is clubs and diamonds. Not completely, but for the most part. That would be part of the intuitive makeup of the deck. Something that I don't have to really remember very hard. It just is the way that it is, and I can know that about it. The next thing that I did is I wanted to mix these up. I wanted to mix these together so that they are interspersed with each other, and I would still have 2 sections in numerical order, but I would be sharing suits on the first half of the deck, sharing suits on the second half of the deck. I did do that, and I looked at it, and you'll see what that looks like, where you have, you know, a black ace, a red 2, a black 3, a red 4. You can kind of imagine what that looked like. Now, one problem with that is that it does give me the image of black, red, a little bit of mixing in color, but it did not break up the numbers in any way, shape, or form. The numbers were still in order. So I came up with this idea that instead of conceiving of the groupings of 10 cards as ace through 10, I would switch a couple of them so that they would have opposite meanings. So the first thing I did is I took the ace and I took the 10 in each group and I switched them. So instead of being ace through 10, it's going to be 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, ace. So that's 2 cards that we're switching on the outside. So I have 10 now equals 1, and ace now equals 10. So that's just something I have to remember. 10 equals 1, which is easy because it's a 1, 0. You can just think of that as 1. And then the ace equals the round number, the 10, at the top of the set. So that's the first thing I did. I thought that was going to work okay. It gives me a little bit of a break, at least from section to section. But I thought I'd better switch at least 2 more cards. I'll just swap places. So what I thought of was taking the 3, and I'm sorry, the 4, which is an even number, and the 7. And what I did is in each grouping, I took my 4 and my 7, and I switched places. So I have, anytime I think of 4, it's actually going to be 7. And anytime I think of 7, it will actually be 4. And that's very easy to remember. So 1 is 10, 10 is ace, 4 is 7, and 7 is 4. So switch this over here. Now, if you look at the numbers in order, you'll notice that it does break it down a lot, really. Even though there are cards that are in order, you know, 5, 6 here in order, 8, 9 are in order. The fact that the 4 is between the 6 and the 8, and the 7 is between the 3 and the 5, and the fact that the 10 is out here by the 2 and the ace is over here by the 9, this doesn't look like it has order to it. And I've really only changed 2 things. This is now 1, that's 10, and 7 always equals 4, and 4 always equals 7, and that's just how my numbers are going to work. So anytime I think of a 4, or a 14, or a 24, or a 34, or a 44, and we'll deal with that last grouping here in a while, I'll be thinking of actually a 7 sitting in that place. When I'm thinking of a 7, or a 17, or a 27, or a 37, or a 47, I'm going to be thinking of a 4 that is in that location. Okay, so that's the first thing that I did. The next step we're going to do is we're going to mix these together so that I have my spades and my hearts on the top half, my clubs and my diamonds on the second half. So First of all, just remember, we have spades and hearts on one side, clubs and diamonds on the other side. They are in a numerical order with a couple of adjustments that are very easy to remember. 10 is always 1, I'm sorry, 1 is always 10, and 10 is always ace, 4 is always 7, 7 is always 4. That's all you have to remember. But otherwise, these are in a very easy to remember sequential order every 10 cards. What I want to do is I want to mix them, though. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to anti-pharaoh these very quickly. So I'm going to take all the odd cards out, separate them from the evens. So I have my evens right there. Now, this is the 10, so that's an even number. It's not actually an ace anymore. It's number 10. And then I'm going to pharaoh the opposite grouping. So I have over here my number 1 in spades is going to alternate with my hearts. Now this looks, obvious, at least in terms of suits, that these are just spades and hearts, but in terms of the numbers are fairly confused. There's a loss of order because we swapped a couple of those numbers. Systematically, they will always be swapped, and we can just know that about it. And then over here, we'll pharaoh these spades and hearts. Again, spades and hearts are very easy to remember because they're the same figure. So here we have two groups. Now, what I want to do then is put these into an order. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my groupings together so that the odd numbers on the first grouping are black, and the odd numbers in the second grouping are red. So odds are black in group 1, odds are red in group 2. I'm going to do the same thing here on the other side. So odds are black in group 3, odds are red in group 4. So I'm going to anti-pharaoh these very quickly. Now, I don't have any easy way to, get from new deck order into this. You really just need to separate your suits and then construct it back together again. So here is my black 1 against a red 2. So the reds are even here. The odds are, the reds are even, the odds are black. Good to go on that. And we'll do the same over here so that the odds are red and the evens are black. And it's going to follow the same format. The first one will be odds are black. The second one, reds will be, odds will be red. So we have odds are black, odds are red, odds are black, odds are red. First half is spades and hearts. Second half is clubs and diamonds. So just a couple of rules to remember. And now I have a repeating sequence of 10 that starts to look shuffled. Now, the problem is that if you look at this for any amount of time, you can see that there are spades and hearts on one side and there are clubs and diamonds on the other. Even though when the sequence starts over, we get some, repetition of red and black against each other. They're the same reds and blacks each time. And we can just see that there's no clubs over here, there's no spades over here, there's no diamonds over here, there's no hearts over here. So we need to find some way to deal with that. Now, all the while, I've got a whole set of face cards that have not been dealt with sitting out here, and I need to somehow come up with a fifth section that somewhat resembles what's going on here. And I don't have any more of these number cards to do that. So what I thought about, what I conceived of in that solution to that problem was to use the face cards as sort of wild cards, that these cards can represent some of these cards, and I can replace some of these with these face cards over here. And by taking out, maybe sequentially in a pattern, some of these number cards and replacing them with wild cards, I could come up with a whole other set that would be number 5 that would follow the same sequence. So conceptually, I started to think about this and how that could work. So here's what I came up with. I separated out my queens and my jacks by suit, so that I had all of my queens and my jacks. I set my kings aside for a moment here. And I thought what I would do is I would use a queen and a jack from each suit in each section, and that the queen and the jack would stand in as a wild card for 2 cards in each set of 10. I also figured that what I would do is I would make that wild card stand-in sequentially move so that there are 2 cards in the first set of 10, and then they would shift over by 1 in the second set of 10 and shift over by another in the next set of 10 and then shift over by another in the next set of 10. And what that would do is it would mean that I would use nearly every card out of 8. There's 10 cards per grouping, but I would use every card out of 8 as having a wild card stand-in, and I could pull those cards out and make a whole other sequence. Now, this may seem kind of complicated, but let me show you how this worked. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to also use this as a benefit to be able to add alternative suits to sections that are lacking clubs and diamonds or spades and hearts. So I did this. I thought I would put my Jack, Queen, wild cards in this order, which would be easy for me to remember because it's just kind of the converse of what we're doing up here, black and red. I would put my black opposite queens and Jack and Queen in the first grouping. I would put my red opposite Jack and Queen in the second grouping. I would put my Jack and Queen spade opposite the clubs in the third grouping, and then the hearts in the fourth grouping. So what I did is I flipped these, even though it's still black, red, just like these are in terms of odd numbers. Odds are black, odds are red, odds are black, odds are red, spades and hearts, clubs and diamonds. I made it the same. Jack and Queen is black, Jack and Queen is red, Jack and Queen is black, Jack and Queen is red, but they are the opposites as per the sides. Okay. Now here's how I did this sequentially. On the first grouping, I replaced 1 and 6, which is the starting card of 5 cards out of 10. So 10 is made up of 2 groupings of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I took the Jack and I put that in for the 10, which is the 1. And I took my Queen and I put that in for the 6. Okay, so this is an additional rule. Now I know you might be getting lost in this, okay, but I just know that I'm using Jack and Queen as wild cards and that in the first grouping it's going to be the first of each 5. 1 and 5. That's group 1. Group 2, I'm going to do the same thing. So group 2 now starts over here with 1 through 10. Remember, this is 1, 2, 3, 7 is 4, 5, 6, 4 is 7, 8, 9, ace is 10. What I'm going to do is the same thing. I'm going to put my red Jack and Queen, but instead of putting it in for 1 and 6, I'm going to move it over 1. I'm going to put it in for 2 and 7, which is actually 4. 4 always means 7 in this system. 7 always means 4. 10 always means 1. Ace always means 10. I'm never going to look at a 4 as a 4. It's always going to be a 7. So you can see that this shifts over by 1. And I can remember that because group 1 has it on 1 and 6. Group 2 has it on 2 and 7. It's easy to recall that. That is systematic. It's a pattern. It doesn't require a math equation. It's just easy to remember. Okay. So this is my second grouping right here. Same thing for the next one, my Jack and my Queen, but this time I'm going to put it in for 3 and 8. So 3 and 8. That would be the black Jack and Queen, which would be spades over here. And then the last one is the red Jack and Queen, which is going to be the hearts against my clubs and diamonds, my clubs and diamonds. And this one's going to go in for 4 and 9. And this gets me almost to the end. So we've almost shifted completely down in the pack. So we're almost to card number 10 here. We've put a wild card in place of every other card except for 10 and 5. 5 and 10 haven't gotten one. Remember, I still have a whole other section to go. Now, what this does is it does something very interesting for me. Now I start to have a mixing of suits. Just when you think you see a pattern there, something pops in that messes it up. I see a club right away. I see hearts and spades and then a club. And it's not too long before I start to see a diamond again because I have my Jack and my Queen over here. I'm still seeing clubs and hearts and spades here. And it's not too long before that before I'm running into diamonds and clubs, but I'm seeing a spade and then I'm seeing a heart before too long when I get over here. So it starts to look like this is shuffled, even though there really is a sort of a sequential form to it. And these are easy rules to remember. So just to recap, blacks, odds are black, odds are red, odds are black, odds are red. First half is spades and hearts, second half is clubs and diamonds. Okay, so I know where the odds are black, I know where they're red, I know where the suits are and what side it's on. I just have to ask myself a couple questions whenever I come up with a number. Okay, I know that I have wild cards, Jack and Queen, and they're in that order. Jack is first, Queen is second. 1 and 6, 2 and 7, 3 and 8, 4 and 9. Okay, so group 1 is 1 and 6, group 2 is 2 and 7, group 3 is 3 and 8, group 4 is 4 and 9. Okay, and the group defines what the first one is, so it's easy to remember that. Group 1 starts on 1, group 2 starts on 2, group 3 starts on 3, and so on. Okay, so this is starting to look pretty good. Now, this is fascinating. What it leaves me up with is this. These cards and then some kings. So let's take a look at what we're going to do with that. Now, with my remaining cards, you'll notice if I put them in my order, I have something interesting. 10 is 1. I have a 2. I have a 3. I have a 4. Remember, 7 is 4. 7 is consistently 4 all the time. I don't have a 5 because I didn't put a wild card in for 5. I have a 6. I have a 7. Remember, 7 is 4 in my lineup. I have an 8 and I have a 9. I even have an interesting mixture of suits here. So I've got black on one side, red on the other, but they're different mixture. So I've got spades and clubs, and I've got hearts and diamonds. So what I need to do is I need to find wild cards for the one remaining group that's left over. And I've got these kings over here. So in group 5, the wild cards are going to be made up of kings. Remember, at the end of this, I'm going to have 2 cards left over. So what I decided was I did not want to have a king sitting out on the face. I wanted to have a more of a forgettable card sitting out there. So I decided at the onset, the cards I'm supposed to put wilds in for is 5 and 10. But I thought I would add 1 to that because it would be easy to remember. 1, 5, and 10 on group 5. So I took the 10 out, which is actually 1, and I set that aside. This is going to be one of my cards that is sitting out. I'm just going to have to remember that. And then I went in my regular suit order again. King, a spade, heart, club, diamond. And this is what I did. 4, 1 in group 5, I put in the king of spades. I'm just going to remember that. 1 in group 5 is a king of spades. I think I can recall that. Then I go in suit order. The 5, which is the next wild card in the sequence, 1 and 6, 2 and 7, 3 and 8, 4 and 9, 5 and 10. 5 is going to be the king of hearts. 10 is going to be the king of clubs. And then my 2 leftover cards are going to be the king of diamonds and the 10 of spades. These are my outliers that don't fit into my sequence. 51 is king of diamonds. 52 is 10 of spades. 51 is king of diamonds. I just have to remember that, okay? So now I have a sequence here that actually resembles everything else that's gone on. It does not follow the suit setup as before, but because I have groups 1 through 4 organized, group 5 is a matter of deduction. When I know that I'm dealing with 41 through 50, 41 through 50, I know that I'm in this section out here, and I'm dealing with something that's standing in for a wild card. So, for example, 41, I'm just going to know that 1 in group 5 is the king of spades. That's a wild card that I put in there. When I'm dealing with 2 in group 5, I know that I'm dealing with a pullout from one of my earlier sections, which is going to be section number 2. And that's going to be my 2 of spades, because remember the odds are red in that, and it's from the second grouping, so we're dealing with spades and hearts. So it's going to be 2 of spades. I just deduce what it was in the other thing. All of these cards in group 5 are substituted by wild cards, so I know where they came from based on their number. When I'm dealing with 43, I know that it came from the third group. I know that it came from the clubs and the hearts, and I know that the third group had blacks were odd, so I know that it's the 3 of clubs. It's going to be the odd black card there that was in that grouping, which was clubs and diamonds. For my 4, I know that the 4 comes from the 4th group, and I'm dealing with clubs and diamonds, and I know that the odds are red in that one, so it's going to be a black 7. It's going to be my club out here, right? I know that number 6 is a wild card because that's group number 5. The wild cards are 5 and 10, and I know that my next king is going to be the king of hearts. They're in suit order: spades, hearts, and then clubs. I know that card number 6 came from group number 1, where the wild cards were 1 and 6. And I know that there's spades and hearts, and I know that the odds are black, which means that this is going to be a heart, 6 of hearts, okay? You see how this goes, this deduction. And then, of course, 10 would be the last wild card out here, which is that king of clubs, spades, hearts, clubs. And then again, I just remember my outliers, king of diamonds and 10 of spades on the end. So this is what I get, minus my 2 outlier cards, is I have a repeating sequence in 5 groups. I have 1 through 10, 1 through 10, 1 through 10, 1 through 10, 1 through 10. It's about 80% intuitive. 2 and 3 always means 2 and 3. 5 always means 5. 6 and 8 and 9 always means 6, 8, and 9. I know that 10 is 1. I know that ace is 10. I know that 4 and 7 are flipped. So just a few rules that I have to work out there. So let's put this to work real quick. This is my full stack. So it looks shuffled. Okay, especially if your spread is not super duper clean, right? If I spread like that, you might notice intervals where repetition happens, like with these aces. If you're spreading with a stack, you probably want to be a little bit more sloppy about it and not quite so even, so that doesn't show up. And of course, this wouldn't stand out and sit out there in open view for a very long time. But let's put this to work very quickly. We'll just pick a number, and then we'll decide what is there. We'll go through the important questions that you have to ask to determine what the card is. Okay, so let's put this to work. Let's just come up with a number, any number 1 from 52, and see if we can sort out what it is. And conversely, we'll see if we can figure out a card at a number. And of course, this is the most basic fundamental way in which you could use a deck stack. There's a lot of other ways to use a deck stack, and maybe we'll look at that in the future, but I just want to kind of prove the premise here. So we have a deck of cards that has been false shuffled, we'll say. So we can maybe put this through a false shuffle very quickly right in front of the spectator. We've been doing this for a while, and the assumption is that it is shuffled. In fact, it is not. It's actually still in our stack, and we will deduce what a card is from a number. So let's say a spectator gives us a number. We'll go with 28. 28. So first of all, we know which grouping 28 is in, because we have our single digits for group 1, we have double digits through the 10s to 20 for group 2, and then the 20s to 30 for group 3. We know that 28 is in group 3. We know that in group 3 we're dealing with clubs and diamonds. We also know that in group 3 that the odds are black. So the 8 is going to be a diamond, and it's going to be an 8 because the 8th card is 8 in our sequence. Is that true, though? Remember that in our sequence we put a jack and a queen in at a shifting location. So in group 1 it's 1 and 6. In group 2 it is 2 and 7. And in group 3 it's at 3 and 8. So we have a problem there, okay? So remember that in group 3 we're going to be dealing with blacks. It's going to be alternating black, so it'll be the queen of spades. That's what we have. Now, I talked through this, but it's actually pretty simple logical truths that you can think through pretty quickly. So we should, if we count down to 28, we should run into the queen of spades. Let's see if that happens. And I just want you to note that as I count this through, just when it seems like there's some kind of order to it, there's a monkey wrench thrown at you and it looks like a shuffled deck. 1, right off the bat, that looks pretty good, right? 1, jack of clubs, what is that? 2, 3, 4, so right when it seems like something's going to be in an order there, it just seems like it's a A coincidence, a 2 and a 3. Also notice that we have club, hearts, and spades already. There's no diamonds in this, and things are already repeating, right? So we're up to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. This should be the Queen of Spades, and it is the Queen of Spades because that's how we designed it. Okay, so let's try another one here very quickly, and we'll go through those questions. So you want to think bigger to smaller when doing this. Think about what group it's in and what side it's on for suits. Think about the grouping and what the odds are, if they're black or red. And then think about what the wild cards are in that section. Okay, so where do the wild cards, the Jack and the Queen, sit in that particular grouping? So again, bigger to smaller. Pick another number. We'll say 32. Okay, 32. So we know now we're in the fourth group. We're dealing with clubs and diamonds in there. And in the fourth group, we should be in a situation where the odds are red. So the diamonds are red. And if I say 32, I know that the odds are red. So that means that it's going to be a 2 that is black. So it should be the 2 of clubs. And in the fourth grouping, it should be 4 and 9 for the wild cards. So it really should be the 2 of clubs when we get there. So let's see if that happens there. So 32 should be 2 of clubs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, and should be the 2 of clubs. So it is. Now, a couple things about how this presents in dealing. Is it possible to notice some repetition in the dealing? Yes. However, I would impress upon you that you're never really going to be dealing cards out like that, where you're looking at every single card for a very, very long stretch. And because you're only ever really looking at small groupings of cards or small little snippets of cards in any way that you're going to use a stacked deck, the repetition of the sequence should go completely unnoticed, especially since we have those wild cards in there and some substitutions. When we're doing this with cards and we're dealing down through them, we're only looking at small little sections, right? Now we can identify it. We can identify it in that small little grouping, but other people don't get the full picture. They don't see this theme playing out from beginning to end. They're only looking at a little window. Okay, they only look at one little thing. They're not able to identify what's going on just from looking at that. You would not want to be presenting any deck stack. I mean, just because it's boring, but you wouldn't want to be presenting a deck stack like this or like one of the sequential ones where you are dealing out large numbers of cards. That's just good practice, okay? So, that being said, let's try to go the other way. We'll see if we can name a card and find its number, all right? So, I don't know, just pick a card here. Let's say the 5 of clubs. So, clubs, we know that we're on the second half. 5 is an odd number, so we should be dealing with the third grouping. Okay, so 5 of clubs would be in the third grouping at that position. So we have 10 in the first group, 20 in the second group, and then in the third grouping where we have the odd numbers, we're going up to 30. So we're looking at 25. Should be 5 of clubs, and we don't hit any of our wild cards in there in that grouping. So let's see if we're right. So 25 should be 5 of clubs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 5 of clubs. So it is intuitive, right? 5 stands for 5s. 2 stands for 2s, 3 stands for 3s. 4 stand for 7, and 7 stands for 4. You just have to remember that. Aces stand for the 10s, and 10 stands for 1. So that's basically it. And then we have a sequence, a pattern of wild cards, Jack and Queen, section to section, and then we can deduce that final grouping from the wild cards that we took out of it. Let's try that one real quickly. So we're in group 5 when we're above 40. Another thing about this, too, is just to know that the kings are all in group number 5. I mean, that might be beneficial in some kind of presentation. But we should probably take a moment to look at the 5th grouping because you do have to be able to decipher what the 5th grouping is. And just remember about group number 5. All of the cards that are in group number 5 have been replaced with wild cards from group numbers 1 through 4. So if you know the sequence, group number 1 was 1 and 6, group number 2 was 2 and 7, group number 3 was 3 and 8, and group number 4 was 4 and 9. That's where the cards are coming from in group number 5. Okay, so let's say for example that in group number 5, which is in the 40s, we'll go with number 47. Number 47. So 47 in group number 5, again, you're dealing with 7, which is going to be a 4. So just know that. But it's going to come from group number 2 because 2 and 7 were the wild cards in group number 2. 1 and 6 was in group number 1. 2 and 7 was in group number 2. So we're going to take a 4 that was in group number 2. That's spades and hearts. In the second group, the reds are the odd cards. Okay, so this is going to be a red heart, and it's going to be the 7th position, which is 4 of hearts, is what it should be. Now, this is really, really boring, but we can just kind of count backwards. This is 51, 52. This is 50, 49, 48, 47. 4 of hearts. So you have to use some deduction in group number 5. Everything that's in group 5, 41 through 50, is from groups numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. In that same sequential order, okay? And then the wild cards there in group number 5, again, are the kings. So 1, we're standing in 1 for the 10. We're just doing that to use up the king here. I'm sorry, the king for the 10. King of spades is 1. 5, which is the real, this is really where the wild card should be, in 10 is where the real wild card should be out here. We're in order here. We have king of spades in 1, king of hearts in 5, king of clubs in the 10th position, and then we're left with king of diamonds and 10 of spades out there in the end. So that's it. We'll do one more. Let's do one more group 5 card. So let's say we pick, 43. So 43, card number 43, should be coming from the 3rd grouping, right? So 1 and 6 was in the first. I'm just thinking out loud. You can do this quickly enough. 1 and 6 was in the first group of wild cards. 2 and 7 was in the second, and the 3rd and 8 was in group 3. So 3 in the 5th grouping is coming from group 3, which is clubs and hearts. In group 3, the odds are black, so it's going to be a 3 of clubs should be in that position in 43. So if we come out here and we look at it, we have 50, 49, 48, 47, 46, 45, 44, 43. 3 of clubs. Okay, so that is the use of the stack card to number relationship. Let me talk briefly about some other little hacks here. What I did with this deck that I discovered this with and put it together with, I did make an adjustment to a couple of cards. On the 10 of spades, which is on the bottom, because this is not a cyclic stack of any kind, this has to be in this order, I put a reverse breather crimp, a really deep one, on that 10 of spades. And then what I did is I put a breather crimp, which is the face crimp, on the very first card, which is the jack of clubs. And the idea here is that I could cut this deck, and I could leave it cut. I could even show the cards like this, right? And you would see that everything looks shuffled, right? And then what I can do in my presentation is I can cut, and because it's going to automatically break at my breathers, because I've got 2 opposing breathers to really, make a clean break on that. When I cut like that, I can then go into a false shuffle sequence because I'm in order right now. So I could just do a 0 shuffle sequence, like this, or some other kind of false blind shuffle. We keep everything together, and the second time when I show it, it looks like everything's different. If they noted what the bottom card was, they're looking at a different card from what they were before. So just a little hack there on any kind of stacked deck is to put a breather or a pair of breathers, opposing breathers, at either end, and you can always get it back in the right order if the deck gets cut. And that's even fun so that you could have a spectator cut the deck. You don't want a spectator to shuffle your stack, but you could have them cut it. You could even have them cut it a couple times if you're cutting in between to replace everything. So, little hack there. So I hope you enjoyed this. I don't know, the Common Magician stack. I know it seems kind of convoluted, but if you think the way that I do and math is not your jam, math equations don't, work for you, and brute force memory is not something that you really have the time not only to do initially, but also to upkeep, you might want to examine making your own stack that follows your own pattern of logic. And this one seems to work good for me. It makes sense to me. I can think about it quickly, and I don't have to really practice it at any great depth. I probably will practice this quite a bit and try to keep up on it so I can be quick and efficient about it. But I shouldn't really ever get stuck in it if I'm thinking about my rules, about my suits, my number order in tens, and then my wildcard placement. I should be able to always figure out where I'm at and what's going on and use that to my advantage, especially if my presentation gives me the appropriate time to do that. So anyway, good luck with this, and I hope you enjoy it. If you think it's silly, I'm sorry I wasted your time, but hopefully you find a use for this. Please feel free to share it. I don't care if this gets out and people use it. It's nice that people use ideas. You don't even need to credit me or anything. I just give it to you. The Common Magician stack. Good luck with that and happy magicking.